This is Rich Hart. I'm back with Keith Eigel. Keith, welcome back.
Thanks, Rich.
Hey, just as we broke before, we're going to be leaning into the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. And in this segment, we're going to be talking about the formula for growth.
Yeah.
What is this all about?
All right.
This is where the rubber meets that proverbial road. Okay, because there's a formula in people themselves. If you have a good track and a good plan, okay, number one reason why individuals don't do as well as they possibly could is because they lack a plan.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about this plan or this formula.
Yeah.
All right, for growth.
So there's going to be some people aren't going to like what I have to say.
Good deal. Superb. Yeah. And so those folks can tune out.
All right. So we all get how we grow in the knowledge, skills, and ability world, right? We again, it's the way we've been taught to learn all the way through our schooling, through a lot of corporate training that we do. And all of that's important and it's necessary. But when we're talking about developmental maturity, the thing that makes the biggest difference in terms of predicting our effectiveness as a leader.
Okay.
This grew out of a sentence early on that it's. Let me say one thing. When I didn't bring this up in earlier episodes, but one of the ways to think about developmental maturity is to think of a lens that we see the world through, right?
Okay.
And I've got these fancy click glasses, and I've got this lens that I see the world through,
right?
And yet I can't really take a perspective on that lens.
Okay.
When I grow vertically,
right,
it's almost like I can start to look at my previous lens in a way that I can take an objective view and go, oh, that's how I made sense of the world when I was 12 or 14 or 25 or 40 or whatever it is, wherever you are on the journey. But now I've got a new lens that I see the world through.
Right, exactly.
So the question is how do we accelerate development through those lenses, right? And the way a lens gets challenged is that information, circumstances come up that our current lens can't make perfect sense of.
Got it.
Right. So it's like it's when we find ourselves complaining about something, frustrated about it, not knowing how to make sense of it. I don't know what to do. Why am I letting that bother me so much? All of these things. We call that challenge and contradiction.
Okay.
Challenging information, challenging circumstance that's contradicting the ability of my current lens.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, over a period of time, can be long, can be short, but we're talking usually weeks or months, not hours.
Okay.
When I persevere through it, is what accelerates or creates growth. So you think about this. You think about the things in your life, Rich. I think about the things in my life. Anybody in our audience, the things that have grown them the most have been the hardest things that they've been through.
Sure.
The loss of a loved one, the difficulty of a program that they submitted themselves to. It's not the classes that they took. It was the endurance of going through it and how it wound up shaping them. So the bigger the challenge and contradiction over a period of time, mathematically, numerators and denominators, right? It's like the bigger the challenge and contradiction, if you can hold time constant, the bigger the product on that side of the equation. Well, if you multiply that times perseverance, what happens when we zero out perseverance?
Right.
We zero out everything that's going on
else,
around. And usually that takes drugs or alcohol. It takes some sort of escapism to get away from it. There are some people who have money, staff, resources, vacations, a wine cellar. They got all kinds of ways to get out of it. But that's zeroing out perseverance.
Right.
So if we want to grow on purpose, none of us are going to sign up for, I'll take one death in the family and kind of a semi-serious illness, and why don't I get demoted while I'm at it?
Throw some cancer in there too.
Throw some cancer in there, right? Yeah. And so the thing is we've all got little challenges in our life every day that we avoid. I think of the most common one that we hear from people is if I just ask an audience of 30 people, how many of you are currently having some conflict or rub with a colleague?
Right.
Usually it's 100% of the people will say that. And my response when I'm in conflict or having a rub with somebody initially is to tell myself, it's not that big a deal. I'm making too big of a deal out of it. Well, what I'm doing is I'm basically sweeping that challenge under the rug, which is zeroing out my perseverance. It's creating no opportunity for me to grow.
No growth. No.
But if I decide with discipline, with motivation, with so many of the things that we talked about in the previous episode, with structure, I'm going to do this on purpose. I'm going to find a thing every week that I'm going to lean into.
And challenge yourself with.
challenge myself with that I don't have to. So maybe I'm going to go have a conversation that I wasn't going to have before.
Right.
Maybe I am going to, I mean, this is kind of passive, but it can still be active. Maybe I'm just going to journal out why I'm letting this bother me, right? Maybe I'm going to decide to have a conversation with somebody. In these ways, I am taking this outside-in thing that is bothering me, this thing that's around me, this thing that is challenging my current lens, and I'm figuring out a way to lean into that in a way where a new lens can emerge.
Sure. But Keith, you know what you do? You're asking people to take action on their own problem to relieve their own symptom.
And in that way, your growth becomes customized exactly to your needs.
Yeah, but how many people themselves are actually going to take action on their own problem?
Well, again, like we talked about last time, there are some
people like pity.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what we love to talk about. You know, we talk about a lot of times is the weather.
Right.
Right. The weather is the stuff going on around us that we can't change.
Right.
And it's so much fun to talk about all that, to complain about it, to rag on people, to do all of these things. The question we're getting people to ask themselves is, who am I going to be in the middle of this weather?
Exactly.
And when I start asking myself that question, I start creating lens-changing vertical growth.
Sure.
But again, let me emphasize, it's over a period of time. I may have some mini epiphanies along the way, but most people, it's looking back weeks or months that they're really like, what did I learn new about me? And it's like, I tell you what I learned new about me. Well, that's a new lens. Every time you can answer the question, what did I learn new about me, through leaning into that thing, through going through that difficulty, every time you answer that, that's a new lens.
You know, people themselves have different ways of counteracting that and working with that. Already, there are individuals themselves that are self-controlled, and they're able to non-medicate their problem in order to get a solution.
Yeah.
All right. There are a great deal of individuals themselves who take on a spiritual route. All right. For those individuals to say, okay, look, cast my cares upon, the individual itself, my creator. Okay. And then you have other individuals that will live with it. And only time will give, it's like the death of a loss or loss of a loved one. All right. It's going to take a period of time. All right. So everybody, I think what I'm hearing from you is it's going to take, everybody's going to have a different time length on this one. All right. But are there any, I'm not going to say shortcuts, but are there anything themselves from a formula already that's going to help individuals gauge the self or realize, it's not as bad. All right. There are things themselves. I can do that. All right. I know you can do that. Say, well, it's really not as bad as it is. All right. But is there any kind of other items themselves for those that have that kind of detriment or problem of getting over certain things? Some things themselves, certain things are going to be more, have more weight, let's just say, okay, than others. Is there anything itself that we can use to help remedy inside this formula?
The biggest thing is don't go it alone. The
mentors, individuals to talk with, spouse, significant others.
Yeah, and that tends to work best. I mean, we've built all of our programs around the idea that we're creating small groups of people that come together. They learn something big and theoretical that begins to challenge and contradict their current thinking. It's a new way of understanding something. It could be a skill set. It could be knowledge. It could be a different way of thinking. It could be research. It could be any array of things, right? Yeah. Get people to start interacting with that theory, with that new information. Application is best made not in my own personal, quiet, in my head vacuum. Although it's possible.
Sure.
But usually when it's possible individually, that kind of inner reflection is an important part of our journey. But even that needs to have a discipline assigned to it. When I'm at my best in my growth journey, I'm writing down my questions and potential answers to the questions. Yeah. Some people journaling works, some people just listing things out works. But what we found and what the research shows is that developmental relationships you can get a coach. A coach is a developmental relationship, but that's a largely one-way relationship. The coach is always getting something out of their time with you. Yeah. But really, when those relationships can be reciprocal, there is an accelerant in those relationships. There's accountability that's built into it. Okay. You make commitments. I'm going to go try this thing. That's my perseverance. I'm going to go try. I'm going to have this conversation. I'm going to think through this thing. I am going to take this step. I'm going to share this information. Whatever you're going to do, you're taking action.
Yeah, that's what he said.
And when you tell people, hey, we're going to get together next Friday and we're going to talk about what we learned new about ourselves through taking that action,
exactly.
A major accelerant to development. Yeah.
Keith, where does responsibility fall in this? You know, I mean, everybody's got to be responsible, especially today's leaders. There's a certain level of responsibility in working through the dynamics of leadership.
Yeah.
Okay. And responsibility seems to be a binder. For a lot of folks, and it seems to be a detriment for a lot of folks. So for folks themselves as leaders, they don't want the responsibility. All right, there are individuals themselves that are leaders right now and don't want to take on the responsibility. And then you have other individuals themselves say, I want to take on responsibility, but I don't have the leadership skills.
Yeah. And I think this is interesting when you begin to talk about responsibility, desire to have responsibility for something, which is, I think, what you're asking about, versus the desire to have influence in areas that are important to me. And responsibility is a tough one, right? Because we have people, again, that we've worked with. We generally work with people over a longer stretch of time, 6 months usually.
Sure, exactly.
And people come in having a desire to grow. And I think responsibility, if I'm understanding, correct me if I'm not, if I'm misunderstanding the way you're using it, I'm not sure it's a lack of desire as a lack of knowing how to put the structure around that.
Knowledge over it.
Yeah, that allows for it. And so when you can create theory, space, and structure, which a small group getting together to have intentionally developmental conversations, which is those kind of conversations are not about the weather.
That's right, exactly.
They're about what's going on with you, what's hard for you right now, and me sharing what's hard for me with you, listening to your take on it, you listening to my take on yours, us deciding, so are we going to do anything about this, or are we going to just sit here? Right? So there are ways to put that kind of structure around it. But like, how do you get people that take responsibility? It's almost like that is how do you get smart people? How do you get the fish on the line? People? How do you get exactly. That as a matter of fact, if you and I could settle that question on this podcast, we just need to write it down, put it out, and then just wait for the money to start rolling in, right?
I think that's without it. Responsibility itself is one thing. You mentioned something before, and we were talking about accountability and on the account of your abilities themselves. And I think it ties a little bit of responsibility. It's wanting to get out there and do it. We know a lot of this responsibility and accountability crosses a very, very fine line between business and personal leadership. Alrighty. And let's talk a little bit about that because you can't do a business, you can't have a business leadership without crossing over the personal line.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are whole people. We bring who we are outside of work to work and vice versa. No doubt about it.
When we bring these folks and when you bring these folks together, alrighty, they're coming in because they want the business. They're looking at how to engage the next steps of the business, engaging other like-minded individuals in the business. But I can almost guarantee a lot of those conversations cross into personal.
Totally, they do.
All right. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the personal side and why. Are we saying that the business really ties more into the personal or personal ties into the business? Or because that's just a lagging indicator, all right, from the business, all right, that we're going to have a lagging indicator that's going to tell us personally, all right, if things are not right at the home, okay, you got to figure that things are not right at the business. And if they're not right at the business, you got to know there's got to be some stress at the home or the personal sides.
Yeah, it's very hard for most people to completely compartmentalize those two environments. But when you start thinking about this in terms of the lens, our developmental maturity, the lens that we see the world through, that lens that we bring into our work environment, we don't put on a different pair of glasses when we go home. Our level of understanding how we know what we know changes in both environments. So when we can accelerate lens change in one environment, it applies to the other, or if we can accelerate it in the other. So one of the things I think that actually makes our programs unique is we don't restrict people to business challenges at all.
Good.
If somebody is willing to talk about challenges they're having with a teenager or a spouse or finances or parents or whatever they're dealing with, we know that if they can start to challenge the limitations of their current lens, grow that into a more effective lens, able to handle more complexity, more grounded, more inside out, that they're bringing that lens back to work, right?
Exactly.
So, but, and then if we talk about knowledge and skills that we learn, sometimes those are primarily applicable to the work environment.
Right, exactly.
There are other knowledge and skills that we learn that are primarily applicable to the home environment.
Mm-hmm.
But the lens change isn't. The lens change crosses that boundary.
I would say that's correct.
Right. And it's not like when we learn something about conflict resolution in a work setting that's not something that we can't take home as well. The question is, do we choose to?
Exactly.
Or listening, almost anything,
sure,
honestly.
Without a doubt. We were talking about accountability. We were talking about responsibility. We talked about the areas themselves are crossing that fine line between business and personal. There is a common denominator between all those particular items, which it dawned on me, and it's communication. And communicating the fact themselves that there could be a problem, communicating the fact itself that could be a resolution, communicating that fact itself there could be a different path, okay? And I'm thinking, all right, that from these programs, already, and the way you view the leadership, I bet you any amount, already, dollar, cars, trips, boats, whatever the case may be, I bet you communication is a key factor to a lot of individuals opening up and realizing themselves. And that communication itself is breakdown in the personal side. You got to know itself that there's probably communication in the business side too as well. Introverts, extroverts, individuals themselves that are able to open up, individuals that just want to hide what they can, hold things back. We've talked all about these things. How does communication fall inside of this formula for leadership?
Yeah. So if we separate this from like the ability to communicate at a world-class level, right? That's an athleticism that is probably normally distributed in our population, and that certain people are notably good at, so certain people are notably bad at it, and all the rest of us fit in the middle, kind of high or low in some way, right, on that scale. But I think the way you're talking about communication and the relevance that it has to the conversations that we've been having here is a willingness to articulate what's going on inside of you, a willingness to share. And there are some people who, by the way they're built, I mean, we can measure this through personality. We can measure this through social boldness measures that are less willing to talk out loud about what's going on in them, inside of them. And so I think the best leaders figure out how to increase their communication ability, even if they're not going to become like a world-class public speaker.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. But it's like letting people know what's going on inside of them. And that, by the way, for some people, the challenge and contradiction that we talked about, which a more simple way to think about that is if we want to grow, we got to lean into the hard stuff.
Sure.
It's like going to a workout and thinking you don't have to tear any muscle and get any sore.
That's right.
And that you're just going to get stronger because you walked into the gym. No, it's way beyond that. It's like you got to tear some muscle.
You got to do something.
And this is a version of tearing muscle, but now it's tearing developmental muscle. I've got to lean into the hard stuff that is challenging the capacity of my current lens, and that's intimidating.
Sure.
Right? That's a scary place for a lot of people to go.
Exactly.
And yet, so for some people, learning to communicate what doesn't come in. For some people, learning to communicate less because they'll never shut up. They'll never stop talking.
And there are certain trades themselves and certain job and responsibilities that people don't know how to shut up.
Right, right.
All right. And sometimes they're just a little bit more vocal.
Yeah.
Okay. In areas that they shouldn't be vocal in.
Right. And as we learn that, we become better.
And they get themselves in trouble too as well. I have to add. Alrighty.
Yeah. I mean, one way to think about growth, and I think we're going to hit this on the next episode, but is a lot of this is identifying, creating greater self-awareness through many mechanisms. Sometimes it's as easy as a measurement tool. A lot of times it happens in conversation with other people.
Right, yeah.
But the idea here is to become a more perfected version of who we are, to become better and better at who we are. And if communication is something we struggle with, either we're too quiet or we're too loud or we're not effective or we're not open enough or whatever the case might be, becoming a better version of ourselves requires that we start leaning up against what's not easy for us in that arena, tearing a little bit of muscle and letting the recovery yield a better result.
Right, exactly. Well, that's where we're going to take our next segment, being a better version of yourself.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. So join us, all right, in just a little bit, and we'll be talking about the better version of you. Thanks.